Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talent Talks Online. Again, we are really happy to be here with you for the last edition of this first series. So, as usual, I would like to ask you to just tell us from where you are and if you have joined us before or if you haven't. It's always good to feel some kind of energy from you. You are here as normal. Hey, Mohamed. So we had a quick issue with Zoom and our speaker, but everything is sorted now. So welcome again to this Talent Talks Online. As I was saying, and then as I'm always saying, we are a series of online events that we've been running for the last 8 weeks. To help you strive through the crisis and learn from different experts. All of these webinars that we have created during these weeks are brought to you by talent.io. So if you are building your tech team, talent.io is definitely the best way to find the best tech profiles all around Europe. And if you are a developer and if you're looking for a new opportunity, you can also jump on our website and check out how we can help you. As I said, today is the last episode of this series, and you can also rewatch the videos on demand if you want on YouTube on Talent.io playlist, and I believe we're going to put the link over there so you can have access easily. Just as a little bit of housekeeping, as usual, we're going to spend around 45 minutes together. Half an hour for the talk and 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A. So please use the chat, use the Q&A. If you also want to ask a question, we can unmute you and you can ask the question, and it's really nice to hear your voice. So without further ado, let me announce a little bit and give you more details about our amazing speaker today. So he has led a senior engineering roles in many years on financial services in the past. Now he's building a market-leading pension investment advice product for the UK mass market. And he focused a lot on how to build, to shape, to grow strong engineering teams to deliver great outcomes. Today, Mo has accepted our invite to be with us and share what COVID brought to his mind and to his daily life. So he thought he knew a lot about corporate culture, about success and performance. And during this crisis, some things may have changed, and he understood that he was partially wrong. So please welcome Mohamed Brahim from Profile Pensions. Hi, Mo. I'm really happy to be with you.
Hi, guys. How are you? Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Good. Oh, my God. That was like a disaster car crash waiting to happen, trying to get Zoom. Luckily, we don't use Zoom, so we never had that problem. Anyway.
It's okay.
Anyway, I managed to get in. So I'll start sharing my screen.
Yes. So you can share your screen now.
Right.
And let me just remind everyone once again that please ask as many questions as you want using the Q&A section or the chat. You can use both and we will make sure we answer them. So
brilliant. I'm trying to get that sorted. Bear with me a moment. Yep. Right. So before I get in, so yeah, very quickly, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So this is really about going through the experience and you know, what COVID-19 taught me, what I learned through the lockdown, and some of the things that I already knew or thought I knew as a leader, but now I look at them in a slightly different way. So it's not so much mistakes, it's much more misconceptions than myths, if you know what I mean. It's kind of the things you were looking at almost in autopilot without really realizing the importance of them. So I've worked across a lot of financial services, and in a lot of respects, kind of got used to working across multiple time zones, distributed teams. The idea of remote working in the broad sense wasn't new. So it's really about what I discovered during that experience. So if we go through it, it's sorry. So I'm going to go through 5 myths. What I call myth is maybe misconceptions or questioning that I started to have in my mind during COVID-19. So myth number 1, we need the right remote culture. And maybe, Melanie, one of the first polls we could ask people is, who agrees with that statement? You know, there is something like a need for remote culture. So maybe while we get that up and running, we'll see, and I don't quite know how to see the data, but I'll probably see it somewhere. And see how many people actually agree with that statement, because that's something I've been hearing a lot.
So I think we have a quick issue with the polls, but we can use the chat and we can ask people just to share their experience. Please tell us.
Yeah, tell us what you think. So we'll see. It's the reason why I asked this question is you hear it a lot. At least in our company, it was something of a theme when, you know, we were primarily office based, and kind of hear a lot about, but we're not ready for this. We don't really have the culture for, you know, full remote working. We don't really know what's going to happen. It's not something that we are used to. So I've kind of deconstructed that. First, what I realize is when we talk about company culture, what it takes to create a cohesive one, or even what culture means. You know, there are a lot of opinions, a lot of books about this, and the same words always come up. It's like, it's about values, it's about missions, it's about objective. And even though all those words made sense to me at the time, and still make sense today, it helped me reflect on really what culture really means. And in fact, it doesn't really mean having those values stuck on a physical wall, because there's no physical wall anymore that everybody can relate. It doesn't mean having you know, t-shirts, you know, or goodies with the brand and the value reminding you constantly. When you are remote, when you're faced with that challenge, it's not about going for drinks after works or organizing social events, pizza Fridays, where everybody can bond. I think it's these are kind of nice to haves, but these are not mandatory, because otherwise people wouldn't be able to be successful working remotely. Because there are companies who were successful to work, like with design from the ground up, working remotely. Does that make them a culture of remote working? I think it boils down to one takeaway for me. It's about caring, and it's about connections. It's really as simple as that. And I don't think we got that wrong. Actually, COVID-19 helped us realize that we were getting some of that quite right. What I mean about culture and connection is really, if you create a group of people that relate to each other, that are connected in some way, that transcends the physical office, then you got it right. So it won't matter if the environment is fully distributed or not, or if it's an office, multiple offices are in between. You don't need the values to be on the wall anymore or to hammer them. And you will find that these connections are really the primary foundation ingredient to establish a strong bond. And if you have that strong bond, then it doesn't really matter how you're organized, if that makes sense, in terms of working from whatever location, because you can rely on that. And how to do that, it's really simple. It's really deeply caring about people. So I thought I was caring about people, and I think I'm trying to do the best job, but it never came so much as an important point as while going through the COVID-19. So it's really, that's the main takeaway. There's no such a thing as a remote working culture. Don't start the idea of adapting to this new world as we need to look at our culture. I think the culture is really the environment you create in a broad sense, and the role, and it plays a major role in how people come together for good cause and be creative. There's nothing remote or virtual about it. So that's one of the kind of precision and how we could deconstruct that. So myth number one, I think you need the right culture, period. Where, however, regardless if you are remote workers or not, if you have lots of home workers, remote offices in different time zones, that has never been as important as today. And that's one main takeaway where probably we're kind of in autopilot mode in regards to culture, given the parameters that we know in an office. And COVID-19 told me about looking back at the core of it and thinking really hard about what it means, what really matters. The myth number two is about home working. And what I've kept hearing a lot is about, hey, home working will become the new norm, you know, it's kind of probably a lot of people have been thinking about that or have been reading about that and have been getting back to the conclusion. So, but remember, those myths are organized in a very sequential way. None of what I'm going to say matters really if the culture point is not addressed. Once you have a good culture, and then it's not as straightforward as saying, well, then we can work home. Actually, there's something worrying about the trend because everybody will start thinking, yeah, we're never going to go back to the office. I think there's another myth that we need to deconstruct. A lot of CFOs now, like a recent study from Gartner CFOs, has, according to it, something like 74% of corporations now all of a sudden intend to employ at least some of their staff remotely, all of a sudden. Probably a lot of those corporations didn't have even home working as a thing that was kind of reliable. They probably had cultural issues, I don't know. It's kind of staggering how quickly people jump to the conclusion that we're going to establish home working. And I find it a bit dangerous. Why is that? It's kind of, first, as I said, if you don't address the culture point, it's gonna be difficult. But if you take a step back, first, home working is neither like unprecedented or an experiment. It's really always been there. And it's always been a way by which, a method of labor that is kind of useful and can be used as a tool for any company, provided they have the right mindset or approach to it. It's just the problem that people have been forced to home working and then all of a sudden decide it's kind of working. There are a lot of, actually what we see, what I've learned, because I was one of those saying, home working, why we haven't done it? It's really easy. I don't understand. We should full remote. And actually, by looking at it and deeply caring about people, you start to realize that actually it comes with all sorts of new issues that people are not used to. Issues around, isolation. Probably a lot of people will suffer from mental exhaustion, of dying for Zoom attrition, work-life balances challenges, all relating to that home setup that is not always designed specifically for your company or for the world. So I've seen people working from their couches, not particularly comfortably installed. It can be from time to time when you see people more and more, you start to realize that kind of they're having difficulties to adapt to that new reality because it's probably going too quick. So the question I had is, are you really ready to make that call and call it a success? Are you ready to call it a victory? So for me, one of the learning is approach it not in a dogmatic way equally, not saying, yeah, that's the new norm, it has to be like that, but having a really balanced view around it. Is it the right setup for the job? Can this particular job be done effectively from home? That's the number one question. Some jobs really don't lend themselves for a home setup. They're better done in a different setting. The second level is, as you know, a lot of people have jumped into that home working and remote working and virtual calls wagon without really being prepared to it. And it's different. Being prepared by that, we mean it's different when occasionally working as flexi work, as it was labeled in a lot of companies as kind of a corporate benefit. It's completely different when it's your main office environment. It's not the same. You kind of need to adapt quite a lot of things to really benefit from that. So do you have the right setup at home, the right working condition? Is your internet connection reliable? Do you share your internet with 10 other flatmates? You know, is it efficient? And also as a company, it's not as easy as just deciding because you're going to save some money on leases. It's really about caring for the health of your people. What is your plan to kind of look after your employees when they're fully distributed? Because a lot of companies might jump into this without having whatsoever any plan. And initially, that's some of the things we learned along the way, where actually deeply caring about staff, deeply caring about the great culture to unlock innovation is also going all the way to deeply caring for them, even if they are extremely remote. And it's kind of particularly easy, I found in my experience, reflecting on all the distributed teams that they were remote. That means I didn't really put a lot of attention into knowing how they felt about the direction of the company, or, you know, they kind of remote, they were just a bunch of screen. But the reality, you always have humans behind it. In the reality, you have to learn again how to deeply care and help around organizational skills, help with ability to work asynchronously. It's not given for everybody. Like some people just can be completely overwhelmed with that. That's what I found. And even myself, I've never worked fully remotely. I found myself like at times really struggling and hearing a lot of people saying, oh, it's exhausting. We seem to work at 100 miles an hour. We don't really work faster than we used to. It's just a perception. I think it's more adapting to that new reality and getting a rhythm, a routine, getting the right tools, the right environment to be effective. How much of the organization is prepared to look into those issues and support people in those new skills? After all, what we expected from people when working from an office might be different from when they are left on, you know, they are more independent in a sense. So it's not about trust. Again, don't confuse that. Do we trust people from working from home? Because it's a given if you have the right culture, remember. But once you trust them, do they have the tools that they need? And the last point, which is the elephant in the room, is a lot of companies might not look at the implications of having a fully distributed workforce. Specific industries where, for example, data security is an important aspect. What's going to happen when everybody works from home, when there's less kind of standardization around the tools? And we've seen kind of, I don't know if you experienced that, but it would be good to hear how hard it was to get up and running very quickly when suddenly pushed to work from home, where you weren't prepared for that when it comes to tools, to VPNs, you know, that are constantly breaking. And the company doesn't necessarily realize how much of a struggle it is for people to kind of collaborate together in that setting. You have, as a leader, as a company, or as a culture, be aware of these things and be able to address them very quickly, not in a one-off way, but in a sustainable way. So that's the myth number 2. Home working is kind of easy to take from an experiment that was rushed because of COVID-19 into a sustainable and still very efficient, but a sustainable future way of working. I think there is a gap where a lot of companies will have to go through that journey. And if companies are making the jump abruptly, I think it's probably a car crash to happen. And they might come back on that decision with whatever reason. And that reason has nothing to do with the remote working. It's maybe a down in productivity translated into less sales, lack of clarity in the vision, but nothing to do with home working as a concept. And the best example for that, you may have if you remember about Yahoo, when Marissa Mayer was brought on board to kind of try to salvage Yahoo, where she actually made the decision to bring everybody back to the office. and refitting. And that was the reaction to, we're struggling as a company, so it must be because people are not effective working from home. It must be because it's more efficient to be face-to-face for the creativity aspect, which might be true to some aspect, but I don't think it was the right reason deep down. I think Yahoo was already lost in a sense, and and actually the new company, the Yahoo Oka, that owns Yahoo through Verizon, the new company that owns Yahoo through Verizon, all the employees are claiming the number one thing they love about the progress and how they work is the remote working, because it was reestablished. So again, don't confuse, don't make home working the bulletproof solution, or don't make it the culprit for any of the issues. It's just a way of working. It's a modern way. If done right, it can be highly effective. So for home working to be effective, you need to carefully design it specifically for your company's jobs. I don't think there is a template you can just download from the internet and call it your home working policy, which I think maybe a lot of people might have taken that shortcut before. And certainly I was kind of not looking at the full spectrum of what it entails to decide to work more remotely or from home until I faced COVID-19 challenge. Just a picture makes me laugh all the time. This is a type of reality when somebody pushes a policy and says, oh guys, we're going to work from home now. And this is the reality that people might face. Some jobs might not have the right fit to work from home or the right equipment. Just a bit of a side illustration. Next myth. And that's, again, I tried to take everything that I heard about, yeah, but it's not going to work, what are the challenges, and try to deconstruct them. Some things are better face-to-face. So it's probably the trickier aspect one, because there's a lot of people who are opinionated about that. But really, what does it really mean? I mean, if that was a question, and if if people wanted to kind of comment on it, do you agree with that? Is that straight away kind of make sense? Yeah, like some things are better face to face, but what things exactly? So if we deconstruct it, why are we feeling that way as human beings? I think we are deeply rooted as human beings. You know, we are social animals, highly social. So we generally designed to be highly effective in social interactions. I'm not saying that asocial. I love face-to-face, but there's something in our DNA, in our genetic, that makes it that, the smallest signals, the eye contact, the body language, the way somebody walks, the way somebody enters a room, the way they dress. There's so many implicit signs that we're programmed to kind of interpret and to pick up on, that when you move to, and we can make those decisions and probe in a fraction of a second, almost unconsciously. This is how we programmed since the beginning of time. And when all of a sudden you're deprived from that, it's extremely hard, and it's extremely compelling to think that things are better face to face. What this really tells us is, when you're faced with a constant webcam, when you're dealing with people over video constantly, remember your brain still continues to try to interpret those signals, although you're not face to face. It's unconscious. And unconsciously, this is exhausting. So you will try to interpret the body language. You do that without knowing. And that's what makes it relatively tiring to stay on web calls all the time. And that's why you have to kind of unlearn a little bit, and go back to the connections and rely on those connections to kind of focus on what's important. So the lack of face-to-face, if you kind of know about it, I think that's the first step. Why is it that we as humans like face-to-face? And I think it's primarily because of the way we're programmed. That doesn't mean we can get the job done. We've seen during the crisis that we've seen governments still functioning, hiring, firing in the sad sense. It still has to happen. It's difficult. voting, big deals being closed, all done remotely. So what face-to-face would add to it? I think it would add the comfort and that dopamine kick that you get. It makes us happy and happier to have that social interaction. It doesn't make the social interaction necessarily, I would think, of better quality if you really learn how to get good outcomes and have meaningful interactions and connections with people. So the fact that we're missing face-to-face can improve our ability, our quality and the precision of our conversation if we unlearn to kind of try to interpret all the signals that we get in a real face-to-face. I think some of the things I've realized, it removes, I think, some of the unconscious bias that we as individuals might have deeply rooted on us in the way and the assumptions we make about someone without even talking to them. You know, back to the signals you get with the body language, back to, there's many issues with that. And I think sometimes it's kind of helpful thing to build a connection with somebody remotely without all that bias, and do that first, and then adding the face-to-face adds just more credit and more warmth. That's my view. Certainly I was part of the people who thought nothing, there are lots of things that are really better face-to-face. And I think sometimes, and that's just for us to question and think about a little bit, it's just easier. It's not better, it's easier because we are programmed that way. One thing I know, and I don't know if you relate to that, it's I've never been so close to my staff as I am right now. And that in itself is telling. Because you need to care more, you need to actually interact more and build more connections. So, and I think that's the main takeaway I would say from this. So my recommendation, what I would think about all of this is, again, don't take shortcuts and just make claims that, deconstruct a little bit the meaning of things. Some things are better face-to-face, yes, because it's more comfortable as a human being, it's more fulfilling, but the job can be really done, and you can be caring, trusting, and help people grow without meeting them face-to-face or limited face-to-face interaction. But I would say, the only reason you can say that is probably because a lot of us have built that bond, what I call bonding credits, have spent some time together, which means that it's much easier to do it remotely. So maybe one of the modes is, whenever possible, is to insert meaningful face-to-face to build bonding credits and socialize, but don't make them a prerequisite to get the job done. So it's kind of find the balance. Don't make everything needs to be face-to-face, but acknowledge that face-to-face, unless you're completely asocial, and there are people who just don't like it, and that's fine. Use those face-to-face to be meaningful and build bonding credit. Next. That's the one that's been worrying me most. And also, I've been culprit of starting to say that before I started to think, hang on a minute, what do you really mean by that? Because I'm always worried about statements that are kind of too broad and don't have a precise definition. So we are seeing a digital transformation. What does that mean? Does that mean that we are going in the direction of, iRobots and the picture? What does it really mean? And again, some people have conflated the concept of a workforce all of a sudden, very quickly, having to kind of use the technology tools available to them, like online collaboration tools, video conferencing tools, very quickly, and jump to the conclusion to say, we as an organization have managed to transform digitally. I don't think, I've always used the term digital transformation in the business context or in the life concept as the use of technology to have a better life or to create better life or better experiences for people you sell to. That's what digital transformation is for me. That's how a lot of products come about. I've never used that term in the context of better working conditions, because the digital transformation, and as a technologist, I think technology in general should serve one purpose, which is to improve our lives. It shouldn't make it harder. Does the way we work today improve our lives in the sense of making it easier for us to get the job done? Does it always do that? I would say probably not yet. And secondly, depending on how you do it, it can be very easy to create a completely dematerialized workforce, in the sense that you don't see that you have real people on the other side anymore. It's back to all the previous points. And over time, it's kind of, you don't have deep connections with them anymore. It's like it's as if you were dealing with bots and machines. Because if you don't talk to somebody for a long time, it's all through Slack or collaboration tools or Microsoft Teams. It will start to lose the human side. Remember, for as long, unless you're dealing with real robots that do stuff, which is not the case here. We're still dealing with real people. The physical location in COVID-19 has accelerated the use of tech, but that hasn't changed that. So a myth or question or something to think about, is it really a digital transformation we're seeing, or just an accelerated use of collaboration tools that have always been there? They are kind of still maturing, I would say. They're not perfect. It took me half an hour to get into the webinar. I don't think it's kind of there yet. There's still a lot to come, I think. So, saying we've won it, we've fixed our digital transformation, is just like the visible part of the iceberg. Is it what transformation is it then? Because digital transformation, if you say we're using web and collaboration tool to do the work, well, we're already using those tools in our social lives, aren't we? We're using Facebook, we're using Twitter, we're using FaceTime, we're using probably a lot even before COVID-19. It just happens now that it's more accepted or more common in the work setting. What real transformation is this? I think it's primarily a cultural transformation with the digital one, and a leadership transformation, instead of getting to realize that through that epidemic and the pandemic, caring about people, looking deeply into the way people work, in the quality of their connections, and the quality of the interaction, is kind of more important than ever to get it to succeed. And then once that's in place, the tools always going to evolve. And from there, you can leverage more and more better tools and making it better. But the foundational starting point is, if you don't have the right building blocks of right way to look at it, none of that will be a real digital transformation. It might look like, it might smell like a digital transformation, but people will be trying to replicate exactly the way they work. I.e., if you are used to having meetings of 20 people in an office where only one person is active, you'll replicate those meetings just online. What sort of transformation? A transformation has to have an element of change for better, reinventing yourself. That's what transformation means. So if you find yourself more or less, the difference is we all remote, but it's more hectic, it's less precise, it's more stressful. We're having the same lengthy meeting and then we just die with video. I don't think it's a digital transformation. That's what I think. So I think that's the digital transformation in the context of COVID-19 and people working more remotely is more of a cultural one. And the last myth, which Melanie will love, right? We're facing a talent crisis. Are we? What has changed? So what has changed is, so I don't know, particularly if you agree before and after, would be interesting. It's like how you thought about the world is slightly different now. So before COVID-19, London-based office, same like a lot of corporations, fighting for the same local pool, and it was just a norm, autopilot mode. And home working, remote worker, fully remote workers, I don't think we have the right culture. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not sure. So what COVID-19 taught us is, well, you don't have a choice now. You have to adapt to survive. That's the thing. And you can adapt to survive and just silently cruise and then come back at the end of it and go back to normal. That's great. What I've been doing is just thinking about the implications of it. And it's kind of, why are we? So it's really, there's something that is really striking is historically, we have artificially restricted our talent pools to the immediate proximity of a physical HQ office. So there's a typo there, sorry about that. Usually in big city. And we've been fueling cost of living, inflation, created polluted city with horrible communities. That's kind of the conclusion, because if you get all the right things and you bust all the myths, why is it that you should be worried in the future to hire a fully remote if you go well about those things? And if that's the case, are we going to be facing such a talent crisis, especially in the software engineering space that I represent today? Maybe not. Maybe that cultural transformation would mean that you kind of will have the mechanisms, the culture that is ready for it more than ever. And therefore you can make it work. You can have people working closer to their families, not having to have solutions, being able to go on the housing ladder more quickly, and joining a company on a great mission. You just extended your talent pool to 7 billion people all of a sudden. And then it makes it highly, that has never been as relevant as it is today. I know some companies have restarted to hire or are still hiring but I guess once you get to that stage where you plug that actually we're ready for this, it doesn't matter if we go back to an office or not. It's kind of, it's just a tool. Remoteness of like distribution of the task force is possible and can be effective. Then I don't think it should stop. It should stop you from hiring remotely. Does that make sense? I'm trying to look a little bit at the chat group. What have we said? Before we move to the next session, maybe a 2-minute kind of see what we have.
We have some comments from Bishnuji, who is telling us how the aerospace manufacturing sector in the US specifically is being impacted, and how hard is it for them, and probably not as easy to adapt and to work from home and to change.
Yeah, and I think it's a good one. It's an interesting one, because I've seen, so that's a really good example of leadership and culture. Because what you can do while faced with this, you can stay on autopilot and say, this is what we do, this is how we work, we don't really have the right culture. And then immediately close factories and close shops. But I've seen another stream of companies that actually said, how are we going to survive as a group, as a culture, on a mission to do something? And they've adapted by creating new product lines or finding ways to be effective using their connections, using their knowledge. You know, there are companies that shifted, fashion companies that shifted all the way to creating PPE, maintain their jobs. So that's that boldness of leadership that makes sure some companies still thrive or adjust, because they don't make it a remote working issue or the lockdown issue. They kind of question and still deeply care about their people in some sense, because you can see those two examples, right? You adapt to survive by being inventive, by relying on your people, or you just take it as a fait accompli and you say, you know, that's what we do, we can't do it anymore, sorry, you have to go, right? So maybe there's a bit of that, and there's a lot of companies that struggle maybe to adapt quickly from their leadership or their vision in terms of, is there something else we can do? How can we mobilize our resources? And you've seen a lot of those examples, you know, during World War I and II, where companies mobilize all their infrastructure because that was also an unprecedented time to kind of do something useful during that period of time, and others that just stayed in autopilot and said, oh, the market is gone, we're gone. I think it's a really good example of, it's not about the pandemic, it's not about, it will test your culture, it will test your resolute as a company to thrive, and as a group of people who are on a mission, who have shared beliefs to achieve something. And a lot of companies are pivoting in various ways, and that's the good sign, because it's a good reaction. And others maybe find it harder to pivot and to change the angle. I think it relates to a lot of the points that are raised, where none of that is about COVID specifically. None of that is about home working or remote working, but it's the kick in the butt that should allow people to move out of autopilot and start to question the meaning of their culture, the meaning of their vision. And if they do it right, they should be able to come out stronger, maybe even with a different product that is even more successful. I don't know. But that's that reaction that's important, as opposed to the status quo.
Definitely. It's also taking the opportunity to probably make this change, and maybe it's just the right time, and it came now. So we have a question.
Exactly.
Who came from another platform, but you talked about communication tools and having to get used to them more than ever during this period. Personally, I find these tools like Slack awesome, but also extremely time consuming. How do you and with your team do to manage all of these and go through all these kind of conversation with your colleagues, and how do you manage it remotely? That's a real challenge, I believe.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. As I said, in a lot of the theme that I've discussed is either you sleepwalk into what's happening and just accept, or you do something about it. And if you look at the reality of people working remotely, we had specifically spent some time, we realized very quickly that we can't just carry on the way we were. Because using Slack in an office and using Slack when everybody's distributed is a completely different ball game. So we kind of had to talk about it and actually rearrange and set up guidelines. And I spend a lot of time talking about specifically the nature of protecting yourself from the Slack chaos and getting into a routine. And that's okay. That's okay if you don't respond straight away. We trust you. Don't feel urged to kind of jump on the message, because if you don't, you might feel that your colleague think you're going and you're pretending to work. We don't have none of that problem, because we have our connections and we trust you to deliver the outcome. So don't feel urged to respond. So my recommendation would be to have a conversation about it. Set the expectation with colleagues clearly. Have more focused groups in Slack and try to bring some control over the chaos. But it doesn't come for free. If you don't do the effort, it will eat you as an organization. If you do the effort and establish simple rules, for example, one of the things I spend a lot of time talking about is, because you don't have a face-to-face nature where you can guess a lot of what people mean without the precision, you have to be more precise. So for example, don't start a conversation with, hey, what's up? Just go to the point. That will save 5 notifications. Hey, I'm working here. This is my problem. It's okay if you don't respond immediately. Learn to work asynchronously. But that's a skill that needs to be learned over time, immediately. And so I spend a lot of time kind of trying, even myself, I'm not perfect. I'm learning that art of asynchronous communication that makes everybody's lives easier. But you have to be aware of it, learn, research, and then set up a few bits to reduce the Slack chaos. Those tools, I keep saying, they are only as good as your training and your skills to use them. And it's people and leaders sometimes forget that, or techies as well, forget that it's not native. You're not born with Slack. You can do a good job with it if you learn the art of collaborating that way. But again, the face-to-face means that we're not programmed to do that. It's something that has to be learned. It's specifically, and a lot of companies don't think it has to be learned. It's kind of, here's the tool. Why does it work? Just put it in Slack. What does it mean, put it in Slack? To who? What's going to be the action? What am I going to do? So we spend a lot of time discussing it. I think discussing it specifically around that point is important. If you don't discuss it, Either you got it right or you just accept to suffer in silence.
That definitely makes sense. And I think also, like, during these times, something that I really feel it's just calling people, and not only using Slack or anything, just like having a conversation over the phone in a spontaneous way. It's also a good way, I believe.
100%. So it's like, try to find the routine where you kind of balance it and you build those connections. So for me, those calls are a crucial point to build a rapport with colleagues and those connections. I said in terms of culture, it's all about connections. The more you connected to somebody the more you're gonna relate to, checking on them, how are you doing, pick up on some of the, are you okay? But if you have none of those connections, you're just a colleague to colleague, and it's less efficient. And it can be controlled in an office, it can't be controlled remotely. So when you work in a distributed team, you have to have those connections to be effective as a group. So you're absolutely right. It's kind of having, if you have those connections, that will happen naturally. It will build the bonds, and people will DM, will jump on the call, and it's all about those connections. I have another example where I've seen or I've read a lot of managers immediately forcing people, open your camera. You need to open the camera. And I think that's wrong. It's not about the webcam. It's not about the tool. Remember, it's the essence of the connection. It's okay to have a phone conversation and not see the person. It's the meaning, if that person is not comfortable, or actually using the webcam makes the experience horrible because the internet is so weak. Remember, there's a good old phone. There's nothing beats that. You have no excuse to build those connections. And sometimes enforcing silly rules make it just harder. That's why I tell people, all what matters is you get on, you build that bond, and you connect. How you do it doesn't matter. You can use written mainly. You can speak to people on the phone. You can have a webcam open or not. So for me, completely relaxed. Somebody can join a meeting and have their camera switched off. As long as their contribution is heard, that's the main thing for me. Yeah. So we can go to the last bit, which is just a summary wrap up before we can move to the Q&A, so it shouldn't take long. So one, new era, new challenges. But just move out of autopilot. That's the takeaway. It's like these pandemics, this unprecedented event is the call to action to move out of autopilot and start to question. If you're doing the same thing and you're trying to replicate them somehow, it's called insanity. That's what Einstein says. You're trying more or less to do the thing, and you call it transformation, even worse, but you're expecting different results, it's not going to work. Challenge, have those myths and questions. I wish to think about that. Is it really true? What does it really mean? Deconstruct all the things you believed in that you believed in because you were in autopilot. So that's number one kind. So what is the next phase? We will redefine work as a place. I think that's at least one thinking. I'm starting in my mind to rethink work as a place, but work as a different construct, not fully remote, not fully office-based either. Carefully designed in a way that does not presume any artificial constraints when it comes to location, because that's not simply not true. It can work. And it's rooted in sustained strong human connections, and clarity of purpose and respect for talent. So, and also, I was kind of trying to summarize all the points. Responsibly leveraging the advances of digital collaboration. And responsibly is important. If you don't do it responsibly, you end up with frugal life. That can't really balance work-life balance, even if that's what they want. Provide responsibly means being aware and helping people achieve that goal. Otherwise, it's not optimal. Wherever people are, you need to make sure you care for them. Sorry, previous. Second, redefine culture as a place. In a lot of respects, work is an office, and the culture is what you see in the office. And then when you go home, you become yourself again. So everything you see, kind of a personality, or you play a role, or you're an act. And that's what makes the culture. I think with this, the culture will transcend the physical location. And it's true. I think there's an opportunity to fix the inclusion process and the bias that we might have in terms of diversity if we look to unlearn some of the biases that are implied by the physical location or the city you live in or the country we live in, and you open up. And because I think that's another element is like, if there's less face-to-face, maybe, and there's face-to-face for the specific reason, if you could hire somebody without seeing them, it will force you to focus on really who they are. There's less of those implicit, unconscious things that we are programmed, we can't help it, conclusion that we make when we see somebody face-to-face, when they enter the office, the way they're dressed, you know. There's like some people who used to say, you can judge from somebody in the 7 seconds that they enter the room. That goes away. That doesn't exist. You'll have to find another excuse. But was that correct? Was that fair? You know, or was it implicit bias or discrimination? You know, so I think there's in my mind at least, what I would like to see is the redefinition of that a little bit. Hopefully, a lot of companies will go back to normal, to autopilot, and maybe a lot of companies will kind of thrive because they kind of leverage that. And redefine HR as a place, right? HR by mean is the caring aspect. How you go about personal development, performance, perks, you know, how are they going to be to remain a great place to work? And actually, there's something I learned is, I'm probably one that was very suspicious about the fancy office setup with ping pong tables and Xbox and open bar. I kind of see how it would be cool, but at the same time, there was a risk that if done for the wrong reasons, it was just a distraction. And I think those fix that bond credit. So it would be perfectly fine if that doesn't distract you from the same purpose and connection. If it becomes a distraction, then there's dangerous. If it's really in the noble intent to create those connections and bonding, then that's great. But I don't know if every company sees it that way, or if it ended up that way. But some companies get it right, some I think don't get it right. It becomes a distraction where it's just cool. You join the work because of that, not really for the connection you make. And the ability for people to make connections between them is actually pretty low. We have very small clusters, and they go back to their work. It has to work as a global thing, so maybe redefining, thinking about that. And leadership, that's the kind of one. Like a lot of companies will thrive through the crisis because they have strong leadership that kind of can look back at the quality and the clarity of their vision, because now you don't have all those excuses. You have to be precise. You have to mobilize people frequently and dictate the tone of where the direction. And more than ever in this setting, great managers and coaches make a big difference. There's nothing worse than being on your own, working remotely, forced to work from the office, and the manager doesn't show up. Not in the sense of micromanaging what you do or trying to put some sneaky controls to see if you're online, that kind of thing. Bad experiences. But the true coach kind of understands, okay, we are in it. This is a transition. What do you need? What's your life look like? How do you work? How's things at home? Because now I need to know, kind of, because I can't be silent to it, because your home is kind of a tiny little remote office of the company now. So it's looking at it that way without being intrusive into people's life. It's just understanding the constraints of the environment to see if you can help and if you can, help them with guidance in terms of how to organize their lives. So, but leadership is all about that in this context. And that's it. As a conclusion, better technologies will influence the way we work, bring people together. We will see a rise of digital nomads. And what I call digital nomads is what we're going to see as the norm in the future. They are the people who excel at building connections first, a culture that transcends the physical office, and are able to reposition the concept of the office. And companies that actively transform to leverage this will not only survive, but I think will thrive. So try to be a digital nomad. You'll succeed wherever you work, from home or from an office. You're still a nomad. And I think that's the main takeaway. And hopefully this presentation, I managed to kind of convey the myth, what I've learned, what I thought I knew, while I was in autopilot before the crisis, and now I'm kind of more aware.
Thank you so much, Mo. That's really, really interesting. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people will identify with these, and I do as well. Do you guys have questions? You can use the chat, the Q&A, to ask as many questions as you would like. Mo is here to help as well. So are you already working on applying all of these to your team and to Profile Pensions as like the whole company?
I think one thing that happens to realize is we weren't doing too bad in a lot of those aspects, but we didn't know until we were faced with the challenge. So that's kind of the good news. But looking into it deeper, it certainly has opened up the question about how we're going to frame the next post-COVID-19 kind of approach. And we're not taking at it as we're going to go back to the office. We don't know. What we know is we will involve our people in the design. We will bring those, cultural works, specific issues with home working and certain circumstances. Does it work for people? And try to design it in a cohesive way that will make sure we keep our culture right. I think it's nothing else. When you're faced with COVID-19, you can see straight away if your culture is right or not. That's what I mean. It's a level of connections that will show that actually people are really working hard for each other or not. And I can see two types of companies going through it today, based on the feedback and the conversation I have. People really struggling and being isolated, and people actually being fine, other than a bit of upskilling. They're actually mentally fine. But it's not the case everywhere. Some people are really going through it with a sense of isolation. And that's where it's lacking connections and all the good things.
Correct.
So we're going to take that away, make sure that whatever happens in the future is kind of leverages what we've learned, because we can do it effectively without being dogmatic. So it's kind of eyes open.
And constantly adapting everything. Exactly. Yep, definitely. So I'm just checking because I believe we have some problems with Zoom today, and some questions were arriving me also on Slack, but I believe all good. We are good with the questions. Thank you so much, Mo, for sharing these moments with us. We will send, so this is recorded and you will be able to see the record, and we will share it tomorrow. Thank you for all the insights. Thank you for joining me for this Talent Talks final episode, and we will come back for another edition soon. So guys, see you soon, I believe, and thank you, Mo.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.